at Christmas dinner in Millbrook Heights. I handed my stepmother Vivienne a beautifully wrapped gift box and watched her pale blue eyes light up with that familiar greedy excitement she always got when she thought she was getting something expensive. The entire Caldwell family was gathered around the mahogany dining table: my father Edgar, my younger brother Marcus, my half-sister Sophia, and even my Aunt Beatrice had driven down from Cedar Ridge for the holidays. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles filled the air, Christmas carols played softly in the background, and snow was falling gently outside the large bay windows of our family home on Elmwood Avenue. When Vivienne opened that carefully wrapped box, the color drained from her perfectly made-up face so fast I thought she might actually faint right there in her expensive cream-colored cashmere sweater. What she found inside was exactly what she deserved, and when the whole family saw her reaction, the way her hands started trembling, the way she gasped and nearly dropped the box, the way she looked at me with something between horror and rage, I finally got the justice I'd been planning for 8 long months. Ever since the day she threw away my late mother's jewelry like it was nothing more than worthless junk. But let me back up and tell you exactly how we got to this moment, because what happened that Christmas Day wasn't just about revenge, it was about memory, family, and the profound cruelty that can exist between people who are supposed to love each other. My mother Isabella Caldwell died on a rainy Tuesday in October when I was 16 years old. Breast cancer, diagnosed too late, fought to briefly. She was only 42. With so much life ahead of her, so many plans that would never come to fruition. I was a junior at Millbrook High School, worried about SATs and college applications and whether Jake Morrison would ask me to prom. In the span of 6 months, my world went from typical teenage concerns to watching the strongest person I knew fade away in a sterile hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Mom had always been meticulous about her appearance. Not in a vain way, but in the way of someone who understood that how you present yourself to the world matters. She worked as a librarian at Millbrook University, where she met my father Edgar during his graduate studies in Victorian literature. Every morning, she would sit at her vanity, an antique mahogany piece that had belonged to her grandmother Elena, and carefully select her jewelry for the day. I used to love watching her morning routine when I was little, back when the world felt safe and predictable. She would let me sit on the small velvet stool beside her vanity while she brushed her long dark hair and chose which pieces to wear. Jewelry tells a story, Catherine, she would say, holding up different necklaces to see how they caught the morning light streaming through the bedroom windows. Every piece has meaning, has memory. Someday, these will be yours, and you'll understand what I mean. Her engagement ring was a simple solitaire diamond, nothing flashy or ostentatious, but it sparkled like captured starlight when she moved her hands. The wedding band that accompanied it was delicate white gold, engraved with tiny roses around the circumference, a detail so fine you had to look closely to see it. She told me once that Dad had saved for 8 months to buy that set when he was just a graduate student living on ramen noodles and black coffee, spending every spare dollar on books instead of food. Then there was the pearl necklace, my absolute favorite piece in her entire collection. It was a graduation gift from her parents when she finished her master's degree in library science at Syracuse University. The pearls were perfectly matched, lustrous and warm against her skin, and she wore them every Sunday to St. Michael's Cathedral and on special occasions. The clasp was white gold with tiny diamonds, and when she wore it, she looked like something out of a classic movie. When I graduated from high school, she fastened that necklace around my neck with tears in her eyes and said, "You'll wear this to your college graduation, and your wedding. And someday you'll pass it on to your own daughter." But the piece with the most history, the one that meant the most to our family's story, was the sapphire ring. It belonged to my great-grandmother Elena, who had immigrated from Naples, Italy in the 1920s with nothing but hope and that ring sewn into the lining of her winter coat. The sapphire was deep blue like midnight water, surrounded by tiny diamonds that caught light like stars, and Elena had worn it every day until she passed it to my grandmother Maria, who passed it to my mother. This ring has seen for generations of strong women, Mom would tell me, turning it slowly on her finger so the facets caught the light. It survived the Depression, to world wars, immigration, heartbreak, and more loss than you can imagine. But it's also seen love, hope, and new beginnings. That's what makes it precious, not the stones, but the stories. There was also the delicate gold bracelet that had been my father's first Christmas gift to her when they were just dating, and he was a broke graduate student who tutored undergraduates to pay for his own classes. It wasn't expensive, probably cost him $50 that he couldn't afford, but she cherished it because of what it represented: young love, hope for the future, the beginning of everything that would become our family. She wore it every single day, even when she was sick in the hospital, even when her wrists became so thin that it seemed like it might slip right off and disappear under the white hospital sheets. Mom's vanity was like a small, sacred museum of our family's history. The jewelry box itself was a work of art, mahogany with mother-of-pearl inlay that shimmered in different colors depending on how the light hit it, lined with deep purple velvet that felt like silk under your fingertips. When you opened the lid, a tiny ballerina in a pink tutu would spin slowly while fleur-de-lis played on a delicate music box mechanism that had never missed a note in all the years I'd known it. I must have opened that box 1,000 times as a child, mesmerized by the dancing ballerina and the way each compartment held its treasures like a carefully curated exhibition. In the larger compartment, Mom kept her everyday pieces, simple gold stud earrings that caught the light, a few casual rings she'd rotate depending on her mood, a silver Timex watch that had been her mother's and still kept perfect time after 30 years. The smaller compartments held the special things: an engagement ring when she wasn't wearing it, a pair of diamond earrings Dad had given her for their 10th anniversary, a delicate gold cross necklace that had been blessed by Pope John Paul II during her parents' pilgrimage to Rome in 1985. There was even a small drawer at the bottom where she kept pieces that weren't quite jewelry but were still precious: the hospital bracelet from when I was born with my tin Y footprints stamped on it, a small silver locket with my baby picture inside where I looked like a wrinkled little alien, a charm bracelet where she added a new charm for every important family milestone. There was a tiny graduation cap for when she finished her master's degree, a small house for when she and Dad bought our home on Elmwood Avenue, a baby shoe for when Marcus was born, and a small book for when she got her job at the university library after Mom died. That vanity became my sanctuary. Dad couldn't bear to go through her things right away, so her room remained exactly as she'd left it for almost 2 years. The bed was still made with the quilt her grandmother had sewn. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand next to a bookmark holding her place in Jane Eyre, and her jewelry box still sat in its place of honor on the vanity. I would go in there sometimes when the grief felt too heavy to carry alone, and sit at her vanity, opening the jewelry box just to hear the familiar melody and remember her hands carefully placing each piece in its designated spot. I would try on the rings that were too big for my teenage fingers, hold the necklaces up to the mirror, and imagine wearing them someday when I was older. When I was the kind of woman who could carry the weight of such beautiful, meaningful things. I had plans for those pieces, dreams of when I would wear them and what they would mean to me. I imagined wearing her engagement ring when I got engaged myself, or the pearl necklace at my college graduation like she'd promised. I pictured my own future daughter sitting at that same vanity, learning the stories behind each piece, understanding that she was part of something bigger than herself. Part of a chain of strong women who had loved and been loved. Vivienne Preston entered our lives 3 years after Mom's death, when I was a freshman at Millbrook University studying marketing and Marcus was a sophomore at Millbrook Heights trying to figure out whether he wanted to play basketball or focus on his computer programming obsession. Dad had started dating again about a year earlier, which had been difficult for both Marcus and me to accept. But we understood that he was lonely and that Mom wouldn't have wanted him to spend the rest of his life alone, eating frozen dinners and falling asleep in his reading chair. Vivienne was different from the other women Dad had dated during the tentative year of re-entering the dating world. She was polished, sophisticated, and remarkably put together in a way that seemed almost too perfect, like she had stepped out of a magazine about successful professional women. Where Mom had been warm and nurturing, the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthdays and always had homemade cookies in the kitchen, Vivienne was cool and elegant. The kind of person who planned dinner parties a month in advance and never had a hair out of place. She was 38 when she married Dad, a divorced real estate agent who specialized in high-end properties in the wealthy neighborhoods surrounding Millbrook University. She drove a white BMW that always looked like it had just been detailed, always wore designer clothes in neutral colors that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year, and had this way of speaking that made everything sound like a polite suggestion even when it was clearly a demand. Vivienne came with her own daughter, Sophia, who was 12 at the time and seemed as perfectly polished as her mother. Sophia had been raised to be seen and not heard, to never leave messes, to always look presentable and speak when spoken to. She was polite to Marcus and me, but there was a distance there. A sense that we were all just actors playing at being a family rather than people who actually cared about each other's hopes and dreams and fears. At first, Vivienne seemed to respect the memory of my mother. She didn't try to redecorate the house immediately, didn't throw away Mom's extensive collection of books or rearrange the garden that Mom had spent years perfecting. She even continued some of Mom's traditions, like the Christmas Eve pancake breakfast with fresh strawberries and whipped cream, and the Easter egg hunt in the backyard where she hid plastic eggs filled with money and candy. I was cautiously optimistic that maybe this could work, that maybe we could blend our families without losing the essence of what Mom had built. Vivienne seemed to understand that she wasn't trying to replace Mom, but rather to add something new to our family structure. She was patient with Marcus's teenage moodiness, supportive of my college ambitions, and genuinely seemed to love Dad in a way that made him happy for the first time since Mom's death. But gradually, subtly, things began to change. It started small, a suggestion that we might want to update the living room furniture because the couch was getting a bit worn. A comment that the kitchen curtains were looking a bit dated and maybe something in a more neutral color would brighten the space. Vivienne never directly criticized Mom's choices, but she had this way of making suggestions that felt like gentle corrections, as if our home needed her sophisticated touch to truly be complete and properly decorated. The changes accelerated after she and Dad got married in a small ceremony at the Millbrook Country Club. It wasn't a big wedding, just immediate family and a few close friends, but it felt like a turn-in. G-point, a moment when Vivienne stopped being a guest in our home and started being the woman in charge of it. Suddenly, everything needed to be refreshed and modernized and brought up to current standards. Mom's favorite reading chair, a deep blue velvet armchair where she used to curl up with her books and a cup of tea, was replaced with a sleek leather recliner that nobody actually found comfortable but looked very sophisticated in the corner of the living room. The warm yellow paint in the kitchen, which had made the whole room feel like sunshine even on cloudy days, was covered with trendy gray that made the whole space feel cold and sterile. The family photos that had covered the mantelpiece, pictures of family vacations, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, all the random moments that make up a life were streamlined into a few carefully curated images in matching silver frames. Most of the photos of Mom were relocated to less prominent places or disappeared entirely, replaced with professional family portraits that Vivienne had commissioned where we all looked happy and coordinated but somehow not quite real. Mom's extensive book collection, which had filled built-in shelves throughout the house, was organized and edited. The romance novels and mystery books that Mom had loved were declutter and donate to the library book sale. The poetry collections and classic literature were kept but moved to Dad's study where they wouldn't be in the way. The children's books that Mom had saved from Marcus's and my childhood, planning to read them to future grandchildren, were packed away in boxes that went to the basement. Even the garden began to change. Mom had loved roses and had spent years cultivating different varieties, learning their names and care requirements, planning the garden so something was always blooming from spring through fall. Vivienne found roses high maintenance and impractical, so they were gradually replaced with low maintenance perennials and ornamental grasses that looked stylish but had no personal meaning, no stories attached to them. Each change was presented as an improvement, a modernization, a way to make the house more functional and beautiful. And individually, each change made a certain kind of sense, but together, they formed a pattern of systematic erasure, as if Vivienne was methodically removing every trace of my mother's presence from the house where she had lived and loved and created a family. The biggest change came when Vivienne moved into Mom's bedroom. Dad had been sleeping in the guest room since Mom's death, unable to face the prospect of sleeping in their shared space without her. Surrounded by her books and her photos and the faint scent of her perfume that seemed to linger in the fabric of the curtains and the bedsheets. But Vivienne, practical as always, pointed out that the master bedroom was much larger and had better natural light and a private bathroom with a soaking tub. "It's not healthy to turn it into a shrine, Edgar," she said during one of their conversations that I overheard from the hallway outside their room. "Isabella wouldn't want you to avoid living your life because of memories. She'd want you to move forward and embrace the future. Move forward." That phrase would become Vivienne's favorite way to dismiss anything related to Mom's memory. Anytime Marcus or I expressed discomfort with the changes, anytime we wanted to keep something the way Mom had left it, Vivienne would gently suggest that we needed to move forward and embrace the future rather than living in the past. When she moved into the master bedroom, most of Mom's personal items were boxed up and moved to the basement. Dad kept a few things, a framed photo on his nightstand, Mom's favorite perfume bottle on the dresser though he never opened it, a small carved jewelry box that had belonged to his grandmother. But everything else was deemed unnecessary clutter that was preventing the family from moving forward. Everything except the jewelry, which remained in its place on the vanity for about 6 months. Mom's jewelry box continued to sit on the vanity, untouched but still present like a small monument to her memory. Vivienne had replaced Mom's perfumes and makeup with her own expensive products, creams that cost more than my textbooks, makeup in precisely organized containers, perfumes with names I couldn't pronounce. She had switched out the bedding in curtains, replaced Mom's reading chair with a modern bench, hung new artwork on the walls, but the jewelry box remained in its place of honor. I took this as a sign of respect, proof that even Vivienne understood that some things were too sacred to disturb, too meaningful to be casually discarded or relocated. The jewelry box represented not just material possessions, but family history, love stories, the tangible connection between past and future that Mom had always talked about. I was wrong. It was a Thursday in April, 8 months ago now. I remember the date exactly, April 18th. Because it was marked on my calendar as the day I was supposed to attend my college friend Emma's baby shower in Riverside. I had taken the afternoon off from my job at Henderson Marketing to attend the shower. And I was excited about it because Emma was having a girl and I had found the perfect gift, a children's book about strong men throughout history that I thought the baby could grow into. It was one of those perfect spring days when everything feels possible. When the air smells like blooming flowers and fresh beginnings, and you can almost believe that the world is fundamentally good and beautiful. The dogwood trees along Elmwood Avenue were in full bloom, covering the street in pink and white petals that looked like confetti. And I remember thinking as I drove home to change clothes that Mom would have loved to see how beautiful her garden looked this time of year. I had driven home around 2 p.m. to change into something more appropriate for the baby shower. My work clothes were too formal, and I wanted to wear the spring dress that Mom had bought me for my birthday the year before she died. I pulled into our driveway to find Dad's car gone. He was teaching his Victorian literature seminar at the university and wouldn't be home until evening, and Vivienne's white BMW parked in its usual spot in the garage. The house felt different when I walked in, though I couldn't immediately identify why. There was an energy of busy activity, the sense that someone had been working hard at something for hours. The air smelled like lemon cleaning supplies and the expensive candles Vivienne preferred, but underneath that was something else, the smell of garbage bags and change. I called out hello, as I always did when entering the house, but got no response. Vivienne's car was there, so I knew she was home, but she might have been on a phone call with a client or dealing with paperwork in her home office. I headed upstairs to my old bedroom to find the dress I wanted to wear. As I passed the master bedroom, I glanced in automatically, a habit left over from childhood when I would check to see if Mom was napping or reading, and noticed that the room looked different somehow. Cleaner, more streamlined, as if it had been thoroughly organized and edited. It took me a moment to realize what had changed, and when I did, my heart stopped completely. The vanity was bare. Mom's jewelry box was gone. I stood in the doorway, staring at the empty space where that mahogany box had sat for over a decade. The vanity looked naked without it, like a person with no face, like a library with no books. All that remained were Vivienne's expensive skincare products and makeup, ranged in perfect rows like soldiers at attention. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Dad had moved it somewhere for safekeeping. Maybe Vivienne had taken it to be cleaned or repaired. Maybe it was in the closet, or packed away temporarily while she deep cleaned the bedroom. But deep down, I already knew. The same instinct that had told me something was wrong when I walked in the house was now screaming that something terrible had happened, something irreversible and devastating. I found Vivienne in the kitchen, sitting at the granite island with her laptop open, probably working on a property listing or client presentation. She was wearing one of her usual outfits, cream-colored slacks and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect low bun that looked effortless but probably took 20 minutes to achieve. "Hi, Catherine," she said without looking up from her screen, her voice pleasant and distracted. "I didn't hear you come in. How was work today?" "Fine," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Vivienne, I was just upstairs and I noticed, where's Mom's jewelry box?" Her fingers paused over the keyboard for just a moment, so briefly that I might have imagined it if I hadn't been watching her so carefully, before continuing to type. "Oh, that," she said, her tone light and casual, as if we were discussing the weather or what to have for dinner. I finally got around to cleaning out some of the old things that were cluttering up the bedroom. "Your father and I have been talking about it for months, and we decided it was time to make some space and move forward." The word clutter hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My mother's most precious possessions, the items she had carefully collected and maintained over decades. The pieces that held our family's history and her love story with my father, reduced to clutter. In Vivienne's mind, "I donated most of it to the Salvation Army downtown," Vivienne said, still not looking at me, still typing as if this conversation was just a minor interruption in her workday. There was quite a lot of jewelry that no one was wearing, just taking up space in that old box. Some of it was too worn out even for donation, so I threw it away. "Really, Catherine, it was just sitting there gathering dust." Your father agreed that it was time to move forward. The room seemed to tilt around. Me. Donated. Thrown away. Just sitting there gathering dust. The pearl necklace that was supposed to be mine at my wedding. The sapphire ring that had survived immigration and war and for generations of strong women. The delicate gold bracelet that represented my parents' young love. All of it reduced to unwanted items taking up space. Vivienne finally looked up from her laptop, and I saw something in her expression that I'd never noticed before, a cold satisfaction, as if she had been waiting for this moment and was enjoying my reaction. Her pale blue eyes were completely calm, almost amused, as if my distress was mildly entertaining to her. "Oh, I couldn't tell you specifically which pieces went where," she said with a slight shrug. "I made several donation runs this week too. Different organizations. It all just blended together, really. Just old jewelry that needed to find new homes." She turned back to her laptop and continued typing, as if this conversation was already over. As if the systematic destruction of my mother's legacy was just a mundane household task that she'd finally gotten around to completing. The casual dismissal was almost worse than the act itself, the idea that something so precious to me was so unimportant to her that she couldn't even be bothered to remember the details. New memories. New traditions, as if the memories attached to Mom's jewelry were outdated files that needed to be deleted to make space on a hard drive. As if the traditions that connected me to my mother and my great-grandmother and the long line of strong women who had come before me were obstacles to overcome rather than treasures to cherish. I stood there in that kitchen, surrounded by the smell of the expensive vanilla candles Vivienne preferred and the cold gray walls she had painted over Mom's warm yellow, and felt something fundamental break inside me. This wasn't just about jewelry, though the loss of those specific pieces was devastating. This was about erasure, about the systematic removal of my mother from her own home. About Vivienne's need to establish herself as the only woman who mattered in the Caldwell family history. And then I went upstairs, changed into that spring dress that Mom had bought me, and drove to Emma's baby shower, where I spent 3 hours smiling and cooing over tiny pink clothes and making small talk about nursery themes and baby names while inside I felt like I was drowning in rage and grief. That night, I sat in my small apartment in Riverside, staring at the wall and feeling the full weight of what I had lost. It wasn't just the monetary value of the jewelry, though some of those pieces had been worth thousands of dollars. It was the history, the stories, the tangible connection to my mother and the women who had come before her. It was the future I had imagined, wearing those pieces at my own wedding and passing them on to my own daughter someday. Instead, as I sat there surrounded by the silence of my empty apartment, another plan began to form. If Vivienne thought my mother's precious jewelry was just worthless clutter, then maybe it was time to show her exactly what worthless clutter actually looked like. If she couldn't tell the difference between treasures and trash, then perhaps I should give her some trash wrapped up like treasure and see how she enjoyed the experience. The idea grew slowly, fed by months of suppressed anger and the daily reminders of everything I had lost. Every time I visited the house and saw the empty vanity. Every time Vivienne made another comment about moving forward or letting go of the past, every time she casually dismissed something else that had belonged to my mother, the plan became clearer and more detailed. I would give Vivienne a gift, a very special gift. Something that would show her exactly what she had done to me and my family, and I would do it at Christmas dinner, surrounded by everyone who mattered, so that her reaction would be witnessed and remembered by our entire family. The planning took months, but tonight, on Christmas Day 2024, surrounded by our family in the house where my mother had loved and been loved, Vivienne was finally going to open that beautifully wrapped box and discover exactly what her cruelty had cost us all. The gift box sat in front of her now, golden paper gleaming in the light from the chandelier, red velvet ribbon perfectly tied. She had no idea what was coming. No idea that this moment had been 8 months in the making, no idea that justice was about to be served on fine china in the dining room where my mother had hosted countless family dinners. As I watched her carefully untie that ribbon, trying not to damage the expensive wrapping paper, I felt a mixture of nervousness and anticipation that I'd never experienced before. This wasn't just about getting revenge on Vivienne, though I'll admit that was certainly part of it. This was about making a statement, about refusing to let her casual cruelty go unnoticed and unaddressed, about honoring my mother's memory in the only way I could think of. The box was almost open now, and there was no going back from this moment. Everything was about to change, and for the first time since that terrible day in April, I felt like I had some control over my own story. Vivienne lifted the tissue paper, and her face went white. Inside lay cheap plastic jewelry, gaudy fake pearls, tarnished gold-plated chains, rings with colored glass stones. A handwritten note read, "Since you thought Mom's real jewelry was worthless clutter, here's actual worthless clutter. Merry Christmas." The silence was deafening. Dad stared in shock. Marcus whispered, "Holy shit." Aunt Beatrice covered her mouth. Vivienne's hands trembled as she held up a plastic pearl necklace. "Catherine, what is this?" "Justice," I said calmly. "You threw away for generations of family history. Now you know exactly what trash actually looks like."